Thank you for joining us tonight as we explore the art behind the film Black Panther. I'm your host, Darryl Dwayne, and the coordinator of community engagement here at the Newark Museum of Art. And joining me tonight is Amanda Maples, the curator of African art at North Carolina Museum of Art. And tonight she will be sharing some insight about the rich history that played a major role in the creation of this blockbuster hit that still has the world buzzing. And quite honestly, we're all ready for the sequel of Marvel's Black Panther 2. So first and foremost, let's welcome Amanda Maples. And I want to check in and see how you're doing. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
Good. I'm so glad to have you here. I'm so excited. I'm like super eager to hear some of the juicy history that is underscored, or I should say quite a few of the moments that are underscored that made this movie or film such a phenomenal what's the word I'm looking for? Just piece in general. As Ruth Carter, who is the director of the costume and design for this movie, she did such an eloquent job of tying the rich history of Africa to this film. But is that not the only component? I mean, it's multiple components that made this film what it is, and I can't wait for you to deep dive into some of that tonight and share with us. So with that, Amanda, take it away.
Thanks. Thank you so much. That's a great welcome, and so nice to be here with you. So I will, without further ado, go ahead and share my screen because that always takes a sec, and it can be awkward with technology. So get that out of the way. There we go. How does that look?
Looks amazing. We're good.
Excellent. Okay, so yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name, as Darryl said, is Amanda Maples. I'm the curator of African art at the North Carolina Museum of Art, and I'm also the research and database coordinator of the Digital Benin Project, which is part of the reason I spend some time on the Benin Kingdom history that I'm pretty sure is being referenced in the film. And so, as you sort of started to hint at, Black Panther is a super exciting film for a lot of us. It's got these powerful references to not only true to life arts and cultures, but to the histories of resistance to colonialism. So that's one of my favorite things about the moment. Additionally, I'm absolutely a comic nerd and an Africanist. So there was lots to love about this movie. I've seen it so many times, and each time I find something new that makes me really excited and happy. And I additionally, there's the Easter eggs throughout it. And so every time I watch it, those little Easter eggs, kind of new ones pop up. So this is in general going to be a really light, fun presentation wherein I highlight my favorite moments from the movie. There's certainly lots more than I could even mention today. And those that I recognize as pulling from the really dynamic, rich, and diverse visual histories of the continent. So for me, also fashion design, as well as photography, are some of the most amazing, prolific, ambitious, inventive art forms coming from the continent right now. And that's absolutely evident in the film. And there are also major fashion hubs in Nigeria, Senegal, Ghana, and that's coming through a little bit too. And I'd like to think if Ruth Carter was here today, that maybe she could tell me if I was right with some of the things that I caught. Additionally, since this is a Newark Museum program, I wanted to mention that Ruth Carter did actually reference the Newark Museum's collection of African arts for this film. I believe she pulled some Dinka beadwork, a men's corset, a woman's necklace, chest coverings, things like that. So I think some of the South African references are actually coming from the New York Museum. So that's really exciting. And then finally, as an African art historian, I'm going to stick to the visual culture for the most part. We don't have time to dive into the music. There's kora, there's djembe, there's hip hop beats that are sort of fused and blended into seem at once futuristic while also steeped in tradition and history, which can be said about the whole film. So here's my little fact kind of slide. So in 2018, as we all know, this hit movie, Black Panther, took the world by storm. Not only was it unprecedented to see a superhero or comic book movie set almost entirely in Africa, featuring Black heroes that were not anti-heroes or villains, it also featured this baller soundtrack that I just kind of mentioned, and a badass blend of African styles and fashions. So it's a film that's not only hot, but historic, which is, again, why I get so excited about it. So one of the famous, or the things that stood out the most to me was the style, the design, the feel of the movie. So it feels at once futuristic, while recognizable and deeply embedded in its own history, as well as very African without resting on the tropes that's so often seen in news, media, pop cultural references to the continent. So such as like leopard print, savanna scenes, lions, elephants, giraffes, etc. They don't lean on that stuff, or wax print, the African cloth, which we'll talk about in a minute. So rather than Africa feeling like a country, as it so often does, the fictional country of Wakanda draws from a multitude of different and true to life histories, cultures, and styles seen throughout the continent. So a lot of different things that she pulled from. So Wakanda then acts like a mini Africa of sorts in its dynamic pluralism and multivalent fusions rather than telling a broad, sweeping, single story of Africa. So Wakanda then feels real and tangible, yet safely distances itself by not relying on those easy tropes. So this smart style, as I you mentioned, can really be credited to Ruth Carter for the design. And she was also the costume designer of Selma and Malcolm X. So you may have seen her work elsewhere. So she's also pretty phenomenal. And she went to the continent, she went to the museum, she did her research. That's also, as an African art historian, while I was very nerding out about the movie, and props to her for doing such a great job, and her team. So I've got 3 chapters I'm going to go through. This first one is history and resilience. So the various references to colonialism and the slave trade, which again, one of the things I thought was just added that extra edge to the movie that gave that extra push of, challenging colonizers and things like that in single stories. So this one I'm going to spend the most time on. This is a famous scene for the movie, absolutely my favorite. It's commonly referred to as the museum heist scene. It references just one of those real stories I've been talking about, showing how much this topic is filtered into popular imaginaries. So I'm hoping some of you figured it out. It's actually a thinly veiled reference to the British looting of the Benin bronzes and to military campaigns more generally, which was rampant across Africa during the colonial era. It happened a lot, but this is the one that gets the lion's share of attention. So here's a framing of the scene and some quotes from it. So supposedly it's set in London at the Museum of Great Britain, but in dialogue, they actually say that it's the British Museum. So it's the British Museum. And Killmonger is in conversation with the white curator, who he calls an expert. And they look at a few objects together. So ending with this very direct language of, do you think they paid a fair price, or did they take it like they took everything else? And that to me, I was like, Benin Kingdom. So let's look at those masks and the history that they're referencing. So first, the mask here on the left in the film is called a Bobo Ashanti tribe. And she uses that word tribe, which is not at all kosher in scholarly world. So I want to mention that, and tends to primitivize or diminish cultural specificity. So we don't use it in the Western or scholarly world. However, it's commonly used in Africa. So that could be maybe something for us to discuss more in the Q&A if you'd like. So it's an interesting choice for the film, in my opinion. Though it's attributed to a made up and incorrect ethnic group in Ghana, this mask does look strikingly like an example in the Brooklyn Museum by a Bobo artist in Burkina Faso, not Ghana. So this doesn't exist, Bobo Ashanti. It has the same domed helmet with an extended vertical face, close set eyes, and ridged horns, which is very typical of Bobo masks. Another one that they discuss, seen here on the left, is a really ugly version of one of the most iconic, most famous works of art from the Benin Kingdom, which is in present-day Nigeria, which they don't say. She just says Benin, and there's a country Benin, so that could get confusing to people. So they don't clarify that. I think the High Museum might not have had one to use, and that might have been why. And if you've seen the news recently, you might know that this raid on the Benin Kingdom is the most famous case and the one drawing the lion's share of attention in current restitutions debates. So it's become the most visible of the looting practices that were rampant during the colonial era, and the most important topic in African art and culture, which is again why I'm spending so much time on it. So let's talk about that very real history, which is that of the Benin Kingdom, and the very real museum that it was that took these arts. So it was actually shot at the High Museum, but again, it's referencing the British Museum, which benefited greatly from the 1897 raid that effectively ended the kingdom's rule. They're again referencing this pretty directly. So the Kingdom of Benin was founded around the year 900, so it's been around for centuries. It reached the height of its power in the 15th and 16th centuries, when a lot of the artworks came from. And then royal art from this period, which all of it very much was designed to broadcast and strengthen dynastic power. So these are court arts that celebrate the prestige of the monarchy of the kingdom to outsiders specifically, but also to internal people that might want to wrest the power from the king. So as a way of demonstrating and holding on to one's power, but also to tell the histories of the kings and of the kingdom. So they're a very real way of passing on and disseminating knowledge. Super important works of art. So let's talk a bit about that raid. The British on the coast wanted to move inland, and the Benin were still independent. The Benin Kingdom was independent. And further, they were charging British traders customs duties, which really pissed them off. So they didn't like this. They were really wanting to get in there. And they basically found an excuse. So against all advice, acting British Consul General James R. Phillips insisted on visiting Benin City, which is the capital. But he was told not to come. The Oba was in the middle of a very important ceremony called Agwe, which requires complete isolation from visitors. They ignored it, they refused, and they came anyway, which resulted in the death of the other British officers, as well as all the African porters that accompanied them. People don't talk about that. It was the Africans that mainly got killed in that. So in response, within less than 2 months, the British had mounted a privately funded punitive expedition that came and conquered the city, looted, photographed, and burned the buildings. And then these artworks were shipped to London in accession by the British Museum. And then the rest was sold off to defray the cost of the expedition. So this is how they got scattered to museums all over the world, which there's thousands of them in museums, not in Nigeria. So this is exactly what Killmonger was talking about. And here's just quickly, some of the unexpected results of the raid were these, the European art market was flooded with these technically sophisticated, absolutely gorgeous works of art. And then there's that very bad reference. I love the movie, but that was one of the ones I was like, oh no. So another favorite scene or set, I guess, that really stood out to me is this one. So it features a distinctive architecture with an ochre or salmon colored set of curving stairs. These stairs were shown a couple of times in the movie. And it is referencing another real place, the so-called House of Slaves on Gorée Island in Senegal. It's off the coast of Dakar, which is the capital city. And in the background, that white kind of door is, you can see the door of no return visible. And this is where human captives were loaded from the cells that were on the bottom floor into the ships for transport across the Atlantic and into slavery in the Americas. So it's a famous site that is visited time and again by Africans, diaspora people. Obama's visited. It's a really special place to memorialize those that were lost. And I really thought it was amazing that it was not left pristine or clean, that it was tagged, it was graffitied on, it was sort of messed with a little bit, but also referenced as, I thought, a powerful memorial. So additionally, the scenes flying over and into the Golden City feature Timbuktu mosque architecture. That one stood out to me because I've been there. And Monde round houses with thatched roofs, and I've pointed them out for you. This is like an Afrofuturistic mixture of old weathered buildings, agrarian architecture, and brilliant new urban architecture. So I loved this fusion. And then here are the references with the famous mosque at Djenne Djeno on the upper right, and the mosque in Timbuktu. Both of them are in Mali. And you'll note the external scaffolding. That's how it really, I was able to pick it out, is that external scaffolding is used to resurface the buildings every year because they do melt away in the rainy season. So the Monde houses, found especially in Mali, are also pretty direct representations. You can see on the left IRL, and on the right, a scene from the Black Panther film. And this is also a famous site that was once a stronghold of the Malian Empire, probably in the 13th century, but it's still around. So another establishing shot in the Gold City. And it features Mbele house painting. So this is South Africa. It also reminds me of the work of iconic artist Esther Malangu, who has taken South African house painting to the next level and definitely made it part of the global art market. She's seen here with one of her paintings. And then the iconic Dakar streetcars known as car rapide, which are such a colorful and beloved visual tradition in Senegal, in Dakar specifically. And so here you see them featured in the work of Senegalese photographer Alioune B, a close personal friend of mine. I love his work. Another huge important aspect of the film is the fierce and feminine women that were absolutely key to the film, that were just really the baller driving forces protecting Wakanda, right? Like those, so many people went wild for the Dora Milaje, right? Rightly so. So played by Danai Gurira, General Okoye was a loyal protector of Wakanda, and significantly, Wakanda was never colonized. And so consequently became the most advanced technology on the globe, using its resources for its own people, which is Gurira actually states in an interview, Africa never got to do, which is not entirely true. There's two countries, but that's another discussion. So played by an African actor, Okoye represents the question, who would Africa have been if it were never colonized? Okoye protects what would have been. And I thought that was a really lovely thing she said in an interview and definitely captured in the film. So Okoye is part of the Dora Milaje, the red-clad female warriors of Black Panther. Their costumes were pulled directly from the legendary and often romanticized and misrepresented male Maasai warriors of Kenya and Tanzania, who amongst other Kenyan peoples were known for their resistance to colonialism. So the distinctive red garb of the women was blended with the spears and shields of male warriors. Maasai peoples are pastoralist, and in addition to resisting colonial authority, have continued to resist sedentary lifestyles that are pressed on them, often pressed on them by the Tanzanian and the Kenyan governments. They've demanded grazing rights to many national parks. They've routinely ignored international boundaries, and as they move to graze their cattle, so they're mobile. So this resistance has led to a romanticizing of the Maasai, as I mentioned, that kind of paints them as living at peace with nature. But I think in the movie, it's much more about their resistance and their kind of maintenance of their individuality and their rights. I love that. So the Sutu culture distinctly influenced the house painting, the blankets, the baskets, et cetera, of the film as well. And this is significant because the mutinous resistant border guards of Wakanda were depicted as Sutu warriors from Lesotho. So this was rather poignant given the resistance to apartheid that the Sutu kingdom had to withstand. So Botswana, Lesotho, Swaziland remained outspoken critics of apartheid, but at the same time were very much dependent on South African economic assistance. So I thought that was an interesting catch-22 that was referenced in the film. So here are some visual references to those, the real life blankets and Sutu peoples. We see this in fashion design as well today. There's something that's also pulled from, so very much drawn from in the film. And the mask on the Sutu blankets worn by those guards, by the warriors, feature this very direct reference to a Bete mask in the Met's collection. So known as ekuk, or things of the forest, this genre of masks acts as intermediaries between the forest and the village. So these masks come out during Bete, which are enacted at times of crisis in order to mobilize the powers of the ancestors. So I thought that was just an interesting little nugget that she added in there. So next exciting visual reference for me is King T'Challa's throne. So for me, King T'Challa's throne references a Black Panther Party historic photo of founder Huey P. Newton and the royal and golden stools of the Asante of Ghana. So I think they blended the two quite nicely together. So stools with a curved seat are amongst the most important and complex of all Akan and Asante art forms. Some are for daily use or important events and occasions, while others, such as the golden stool, the famous golden stool, is a sacred symbol of the Asante nation, believed to embody the entire soul of the people. So it's not owned by one person, it's owned by all people. And so it's rarely displayed and never sat upon. I also believe it never touches the ground, if I remember correctly. So chapter 2, the futuristic styles with historic roots, clothing, textiles, and adornment. So I'm going to go through the tribes of the so-called tribes of the movie. So the lip plate shown in the movie is drawn from the Mun or Mercy peoples of southwestern Ethiopia. So the Mercy live between the Omo and Mago rivers, and like the Maasai, depend on cattle herding and cultivating for their livelihood. They have a rich and complex cultural tradition that involves unique ways of engaging with the environment specifically, so the earth. Yet their culture is best recognized by the women's practice of wearing plates in their lower lip, and by the male practice of ceremonial dueling or stick fighting, which is also featured in the film a little bit. So these well-known practices have been labeled as harmful traditional practices by in a government campaign, fairly notably. So there's growing pressure for the Mun to abandon this practice, especially the lip plates. But historically, it's a very culturally important way of engaging with the environment, which is so important for them, and also an expression of female social adulthood. So they've tried to hold on to that. And what I liked about the movie is that it significantly blurs the gender boundaries that are associated with those lip plates by having men wear them as well. So the so-called merchant tribe with the woman on the left, played by Dorothy Steele. So she represents the merchants in the Elders Council. I love that because you do have women on Elders Council. You always have to have at least a woman on there, hopefully. And she's also seen at T'Challa's king-making challenge ceremony, which is what that scene is from. They draw from nomadic Tuareg cultures that populate large swaths of North Africa down into Mali. So known as the blue men of the desert because of their indigo dyed cloth, Tuareg peoples are renowned for their talent in blacksmithing, and also with creating geometrically designed leather goods. So they're extremely talented at creating these beautiful silver worked jewelry, boxes, saddles, and leather, all sorts of things like that. Very well known for this kind of art, very recognizably so. The merchant elder on the left wears distinctive leather and silver Tuareg jewelry, as you can see. I think she's got some man's designs too, which I really liked. But she also wears the well-known huge twisted earrings in gold that are wrapped in red thread. And these are known amongst the Fulani, also Pul or Fulbe peoples. And it's a style which stretches from Mali up through Senegal. So they're all over the place. And so very, very iconic. I've seen fashion designers take this design and make them into bracelets, and just like people know these as Fulani earrings. And so I love that you can also see them in the women in the background. So the mining tribes pulled from the visual culture of Maasai people, as I mentioned, of Kenya and Tanzania, as well as the red earthy tones worn by Himba peoples of northwest Namibia. So they're celebrated for their intricate beadwork in bright blues and yellows, the woman on the right there. The neck rings that she's wearing, the Ndebele woman, reference the stunning fashion trends of South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. So historically worn after marriage as a bond with her husband and only removed upon his death. But this is no longer common practice to wear the rings permanently, but still they're iconic of female dress. So I think they're very much pulling from that here and blending it with the red ochre hair designs of Himba women, traditional hair designs. So kente cloth is, of course, now famous globally. I feel like we all know what kente cloth is, right? Was born by both kings T'Chaka at the beginning of the movie and T'Challa in this fabulous robe. And this is a shot I took with my cell phone while watching it. So I left it in because I like that it sort of captures what it was like for me to watch this movie. So kente cloth originated in Ghana, like the stools, is often worn by royalty, so also associated with royalty, and specifically by Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah. So now an international symbol of Pan-African pride, kente is among the most sought after works of art from Africa, making it a global commodity. So you see it all over the place. It's made in narrow strips that are sewn together. And the cloths are synonymous with the Asante and the Akan of Ghana since the second half of the 20th century. It's been around for a while. And now it's also, of course, being associated with broadly being African or of African descent, African American. So historically, the colorful blocks each have unique meanings that can be read by those with the knowledge of Ghana's rich proverbs and history. So you have to be in the know to really understand them, which gives a deeper meaning to these cloths. Yet they can just as easily, and definitely are today, strategically mean nothing when sold to tourists. And there was one quite famously given to Obama that had zero meaning. It was just a really beautiful design, but didn't mean anything because they knew he wouldn't be able to read it anyway. So Queen Mother's headdress was modeled after the Zulu headdresses of married women. So this flared headdress, isikolo, was historically reserved for married women and signified her status as well, based on a conical hairstyle that married Zulu women wore in the late 19th and early 20th century. It has today been adopted as part of traditional Zulu dress ensembles, worn exclusively at ceremonial events and special occasions. Such hats and present are rubbed with red ochre and fat. And originally, I'm not sure if it's visible in this picture, but they were actual hair when they were made in the late 19th, early 20th century, women's hair, and then rubbed with the ochre and the fat. And that was a symbol of prosperity. But ochre is also used as a natural sunscreen and also a skin treatment. So it's associated very much with feminine beauty. So status and beauty, being married, all of that kind of comes along with this. So I thought it was a really strategic and beautiful choice for the Queen Mother. So the mask that Eric Killmonger liberates from the British Museum draws from several different masquerade forms in Africa as well. For me, most notably is the Igbo mask known as Mbadike. So these are masculine, aggressive mask forms meant to contrast with the much more feminine masquerades and dancers, especially the maiden masks. So this is kind of the contrast to that. So this means the mask means the time of the brave and are meant to harness the power of the natural world through a composite forms and materials. So you notice here, there's like a lot of different things combined into the one mask form. That's very intentional. So the men wearing the masks and the spirits themselves are considered courageous, aggressive, fearless, and the mask is meant to harness that unleashed potential of the animals that it represents. So I like that for Killmonger for sure. You know, he's unleashing this potential he's harnessing through that mask, through the ancestors. So Zuri's robes and one of King T'Challa's outfits are based off of the Yoruba Agbada, which is a voluminous prestige robe worn by male elite on important occasions, which often includes rich embroidery, relates to the Muslim religion and architecture as well, particularly when the geometric patterning is centered around the head. The head is a very important part of the architecture and of the body. There's also beaded sashes that are worn by Yoruba diviners, kind of visible here in the center, signify their spiritual position. And then they're also sort of trimmed in some Tuareg jewelry. So there's a little bit of mixture there. As for the beadwork, among the Yoruba peoples, beads are seen as being directly tied to the gods, to the orishas, especially certain colors, and are particularly used to adorn spiritual leaders. So I thought that was also a very smart reference. And so here are some examples of Agbada ropes, just real briefly, a bit more historic and also a somewhat more contemporary one. I'm sure you've seen these around. So next, King T'Challa is pictured in the extra scene at the end of the movie wearing an Ikire Jones scarf. He's one of my favorite designers, so I got real excited when I saw this. There's two of them, but Ikire Jones is a famous men's fashion design company that has been featured in major traveling exhibitions as well as in the movie. And as many of you probably know, I just wanted to here call out Chadwick Boseman died in 2020 after a 4-year battle with colon cancer, during which time he starred in several of the biggest movies ever made. So many props to him. He's known for his quiet strength, portrayed several pioneering Black leaders during his career, and has been an inspiration to a lot of generations and folks. And so I just wanted to call that out and, honor him briefly before I talk about the amazing scarf he's wearing. So here's an image of one of the creators of Ikire Jones on the left, Wale Oyedire, who's of Yoruba descent, he's Nigerian. And I urge you to look up Ikire Jones. And if you look at their other designs, they very much play with noted European paintings and portraitures, but they depict those who have been obscured from those very arts and histories, notably Africans and African Americans. So amazing line. I really encourage you to look at it. Here's the one that they made specifically for the movie. I think it's sold out, but you can try to order them. Maybe some of you got one, but that was designed for it. And then I wanted to know what was absent. So I've talked about these designs, these textiles, what was notably absent from the movie that is so iconic of African styles, and especially worn on the continent and globally, and that's wax print. So that was not in the film. That was a very strategic choice. And we can talk about that in the Q&A if you want. But essentially, Wakanda was meant to represent an Africa that was never colonized by Europeans. And wax print was not originally created in Africa. It is now. There's companies that make it, but it was notably a Dutch creation that was marketed to Africans. And so European in origin, it yet has become iconically African. So it's a really interesting history. And I think that it was a smart choice, an interesting choice to not include it. And then finally, I'll briefly go through the languages of Wakanda. So they may be fictional, but they're actually, and the accents as well, are actually pulling from real languages and history. So the language primarily spoken throughout the movie is Xhosa. I can't do it. It's like a click, Xhosa. One of the official languages of South Africa. I work in West Africa, that's why I can't do it. Spoken by over 8 million people. So significantly, you might remember it as the language spoken by Nelson Mandela, and native to the Cape region of South Africa, which Nelson Mandela was also from. So Mr. John Connie, who plays King T'Chaka, is Xhosa. So Marvel agreed to having the language of Wakanda be Xhosa. So the accent used by Mbaku of the Jabari is very much Igbo of southeastern Nigeria, like Killmonger's mask. And there was actually, it's 2 years ago, but there was this viral campaign, the Mbaku Challenge, where people were trying to mimic the accent and react those scenes. It was really fabulous, nailed by a 7-year-old. And then the written script used in the banners and signs is not precisely based on any one script, but bears resemblance in its geometry to Tifinagh, which is used to write the Berber or Amazigh languages, which includes Tuareg people, by the way, of North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Libya, etc., and also a Cameroonian script known as Akauku. So in Morocco and Libya, use of the Tifinagh was politically suppressed for centuries, and especially during the 1980s and 90s, the state beat, imprisoned, and even killed people using or speaking it. So it was seen as an act of defiance to speak it. And artists and activists began using the script not only to celebrate identity, but to bring cultural suppression to the forefront. So a real smart choice. It looks a lot like the Wakandan script, but it's also kind of blended with Akauku, which is a script invented by the famous King Joya of the Bamum of West Cameroon, and it's classed in the Benue Congo language group, the largest of the Niger Congo language family. And then next, again on the right is what I took with my cell phone really quickly, a Dinkra cloth. You probably have recognized some of those symbols. A Dinkra cloth is typically associated with burials and funerals, and the symbols express various themes that relate to the history, culture, and philosophy of the Asante of Ghana. And they're prominently displayed on the textile worn by King T'Chaka in the spirit world. And again, I liked that it's especially associated with funerals. And, he is here in the spirit world. So very smart. Here's a chart of Adinkra symbols, just really quickly, that I stole from the internet, but I'm credited here. They relate to various proverbs, which I mentioned earlier, and are also referenced in kente cloth. So you see these in a lot of art forms. And in the movie, you see individual symbols prominently displayed on Wakabi's Sutu-inspired blanket and on one of Shuri's t-shirts. And I put what they mean, which I love, for those characters. And both cloth and symbol have these rich proverbial meanings. And the use of proverbs is considered a mark of wisdom and knowledge. So the more proverbs you know, the more of these symbols that you know, the better off that you are, the more wisdom that you have. So those were my favorite scenes from the movie. Some of the references and the styles are very iconic of it for me, I think for a lot of folks too. And I'm sure again that there are loads more, but we don't have time to go through all of that. So I'd rather find out from all of you what your favorite moments were. What were your favorite styles or architectures? What kind of popped out at you? And then we can kind of have a Q&A if that works.
Sure. I think we are ready. This was fantastic. Here I am thinking I knew not all there is to know about Black Panther, but I definitely thought I had quite a bit of knowledge under my belt. And you showed me so many cool things that I overlooked, and now I want to dig more into and learn more. So I'm sure our audience has questions as well. As a matter of fact, one of our audience members already dropped the question in our chat, or in our Q&A, I should say. And that question is, can you recollect any other Hollywood film that used many cultural references in regards to costuming as Black Panther film did? And I'm not sure if they're talking about in general, like, costuming inspired by, different places on the continent, or Africa specific, but either one, I'm sure they would love to hear your thoughts. So feel free to answer.
Yeah, there's a lot of Hollywood blockbusters out there that pretend to be in Africa and that are always doing that sort of single story that bugged me so much, which is why I was so thrilled with this film. I mean, it had some problems. That's fine. You and I talked about a little bit some of the things beforehand, but for the most part, I felt like pulling from that specificity was so powerful because it allowed the style of the film to get away from the broad strokes, Africa as a country, generalized as this place of like just nature and primitives and things like that. Like, ugh, ugh, it makes you sick a little bit. But so I'm trying to think. I'll say one of the other coolest things that come out recently is I think Beyonce did a film, right? A short film or a music video. Like that was amazing.
Yeah.
That gave me chills in a different way because she pulled from some really cool fashions and styles, but she did pull from some of those tropes of like leopards and lions and things like that, but she does it in such a cool way. I think there's also these really famous Congo dandies is what they're called. And so one of the things, it's not a movie, but jumps to mind, I urge you to Google, is actually a Guinness commercial. And Guinness is drunk. It's actually one of the factories is in, I think, Nigeria. There's Guinness factories in the continent, so people love Guinness. I know, right? Who knew? So Congo dandies were featured in this and also featured in a music video by, it'll come to me later. But these are men that dress up like to the nines. Doesn't matter what you actually have, what your home looks like. They get like ballared up in these amazing suits and they go out and like just prance around and just show off like, what. So those are some of my favorite kind of references that I was like, yeah, that's done well. I mean, there's older movies that I'm not coming to mind that are like, Africa of the Savannah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But Yeah.
What we do have another question in the chat, and that is, how was the culture, art, design, language of the film received by Africans? And do you have any insight to that, as you've done, work, and you consistently back and forth between spaces, so you may have a little more insight than us Americans who have not visited the continent.
I mean, I've seen both sides of it. I've seen people saying it does the same thing that I just complained about, that some of those other movies do, where
Yeah,
it's like this sort of, broad sweeps, and it's not real. So it can cause problems also of like this imaginary Africa that wasn't ever colonized, which then strips of authority and
yeah,
agency,
yeah,
because it's saying, well, this never happened. But there's actually a history of resilience and obviously strategic blending of European arts and histories and things like that. So empowered through it in some ways. I think that was, some of the things that were like, well, I don't really like it so much. But most of the people I know, Africa too, were like, this is freaking cool. It looks really great. It's so exciting, to have powerful Black heroes and
yeah,
figures that you can be inspired by.
yeah,
Certainly, I heard that from people as well. Yeah, I'd say it's mixed, but
yeah,
primarily in the positive side. And I think another thing to note is that there's a really powerful history of Afrofuturism that was born on the continent,
yeah,
that has now been adopted in America and taken on its own view. But there are some like really cool South African bands and video makers that are like super Afrofuturist, and this crazy imagination that's come from
yeah.
especially that part of Africa. That's where Afrofuturism was born. So that I think feeds into this film. And so I think that is also where people are like, yes, so cool.
I think you underscored a very important thing there. The outward fusion, or not necessarily fusion, but how it inspired these waves that were already existing in Africa, but now they're global. We think of Afrofuturism. We see a lot of musicians sort of take their lead from that. I know Tiana Taylor recently did a whole Afrofuturistic shoot and musical videos that kind of go with it, and she was inspired by that vibe. And then Afrobeats itself, like that, after this movie, that wave of music became even more popularized here in the States, which before that it was here, but again, it wasn't as you couldn't find it on major radio, right? But shortly after the film, you saw sweeping change through music and through style. So while I think everything has its highs and lows, and there are going to be drawbacks to, you can overanalyze anything and find drawbacks. I think for the most part, it did have much more of a powerful, positive influence than it did negative. And it just felt good. I mean, just being a person of color here in the US to see, and having some knowledge of, the history of Africa, seeing that they didn't play around with it. They actually were thorough in their research. So that part in itself just sort of just does kind of bring you a certain joy. So we appreciate you joining us tonight. They dropped another name in the chat. One person said Janelle Monáe. You're absolutely correct. Janelle Monáe, like that last album was all Afrofuturism, and I love that. I actually got to see her perform live over in Brooklyn during that last album, and phenomenal, really, really phenomenal. So with that, we just want to say thank you again for joining us so much. If people would like to learn more about what you do at your museum and how they may be able to contact you, how would they go about that? Is there a website or a link that they can follow?
Yeah, I mentioned very briefly, I'm working on a project called Digital Benin, which is actually helping reconnect those globally dispersed knowledges about the Benin Kingdom. So I'm very obsessed and currently in that process of what I call digital reparations. So I can be found for the Digital Benin website, and I'll just type that in there. I think everyone can see it. That's the project, Digital Benin. And I'm also the Curator of African Art, the NCMA, so you can find me on there. Anyone can reach out to me at amanda.maples@ncdcr.gov. That's my NCMA account, but I'm easily found, and I'd be happy to have any questions or conversations with people. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, you can find me.
There
Yeah.
is one more question that popped up that I think is relevant to this conversation, especially considering the culture shift that we have been experiencing in the museum world. I know what we're doing at our museum and what you have been doing in your work, and what you're also helping us do at our museum. And that question is, have museums begun to pivot and say more in their exhibits about the way that these items were acquired, like in the Benin raid? So I'll let you take the mantle to that question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's worth going a a little over for that. Yes,
Yeah.
it's finally happened. I will say that since the late 19th century, early 20th century, when these things were taken, it has been requested back. So this is not a new conversation. So I wanted to make sure that that is very much known. The thing that hasn't happened until relatively recently is that these things are now being under discussion to either give back or to have powerful collaborations and conversations around these. We're talking about global circulations of these objects. And also some of the great powerful artworks of the North, the global North. Why aren't these being seen in Africa? Why aren't we having a more ethical, equitable treatment of amazing global arts? If we're going to argue that global arts should be represented in the North, why not also in the South? So these conversations are certainly being generated now. And I'd say even if I started the project or started to work with Digital Benin 3 years ago, it wouldn't have been as easy now. But museums are absolutely coming on board. They're sharing their knowledge, they're sharing their collections and saying, here's what we've got. And here's those troubled histories that come along with it. Transparency is the order of the day. They're talking about those histories. And I think it's really an amazing moment to look at those histories together and deal with those icky histories and feel uncomfortable. Yeah. And I think this has very much come from the Black Matters protests, from End SARS, from Roads Must Fall. These are global sort of protests and movements that are happening that are articulating just how much equitable treatment is needed and social and racial injustice needs to end. And so that being the sort of backdrop of these objects and these collections and these histories is making it's opening everyone up a little bit more. And that's what I think is so exciting. And I'm so thrilled to see being different than throughout the 20th century when people were like, give these back, give these back. No movement was happening. The arguments being made, it was all conversation. Now it's actual action. And that's why I'm in Digital Benin. So.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, it's what a time to be alive to actually see that happening. Again, after these years and years of debate and what's the right thing to do, and we're no longer talking about it, we're actually being about it. And I love that. You did have a question, and I'm not familiar, but this is your expertise. So maybe you might have a little more insight. But one of the questions from our viewers is, does the Met also have one of the Benin ivory masks? And I'm not sure. I would imagine they do, but you would know.
So famously, there were 5 of those Queen Idia masks. Certainly one's in the British Museum, one's at the Seattle Art Museum. This is common knowledge. I'm not telling anything that's secret. I think one is at the Met, I think. I'm working with 150 museums, so it's hard to remember exactly where things are. And I think one of them might be in like Dallas or somewhere, but they got scattered, right? And they moved between collectors and people that benefited greatly from that history, that sacking. But yeah, there were famously 5 of them, and they were taken from the bedroom of the Oba. So a pretty clear case of like those are important. They should. That's why they're such an iconic case. That's why when I saw it in the film, I was like, oh, it sat with me. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with those, and the fact there are several of them. So why not kind of move them around and share them and think of them very differently? So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think the Met's collections are online. So Queen Idia, IDIA, is that's the queen that's famously being represented in those, we think. And yes, some of the masks will be returned. There are already some heads and things like that. So I saw someone ask that. Yeah. That's up to the museums themselves and conversation with the various stakeholders in Nigeria, but it's absolutely happening now. It's already happened. There are private individuals giving things back. Most notably, I think the grandson or great grandson of one of the colonial officers, Mark Walker is his name, and he gave back a couple of things very famously directly to the Oba, the current Oba. Very powerful moment. And now we're seeing museums do this too. So it will happen.
Yeah, we have one last question I could probably touch on before, but I don't know if we would have the answer to this question. And that question is, can you say if the release of Black Panther 2 will continue on this trend of featuring art and culture in the way that it did before? Now, I know what I would desire, and I would desire that it did, and I'm sure I'm not going to put words in Amanda's mouth, but I'm believing you would also too want that to be the thing. But I don't have any insight. Do you have any insight? Maybe no.
No, only that I'm stoked that it's going to come out, and I'm eagerly awaiting it. It's featuring Shuri, right? Isn't this one much more centered on her, which I'm excited about?
That's what I hear. I hear so I've heard two things, right? I've heard, as we share our insider Black Panther knowledge that we know, I've heard that because Killmonger actually becomes the ruler eventually of Wakanda. So that, and I'm not sure if that's the flow or that's whether the direction they're going to take it. But I have been hearing rumblings that this will be more centered around Siri, and then the third one may be where they have Killmonger actually, become the Prince of Wakanda, or the King of Wakanda. So I'm very curious to see how this all plays out. I'm just as equally excited as all of our viewers. So I guess we'll have to bring you back once the sequel happens.
I can
and we
share
can
the
do this
nuggets that I
again.
find.
But again, thank you so much for joining us. This was so enlightening, and so many people in the chat are asking, where is this going to be archived? Where can they find this? So I just want to make sure that I state that you can find this on our Facebook page. So this will live on the Newark Museum of Art's Facebook page, as well as our YouTube channel, and I believe it also is going to live on Twitter and Periscope. So you can find this, you can revisit it, you can recant your favorite moments with Amanda as she goes through her slides, and share it. I would encourage you to post it on your social media pages and share, because it is really important for those who are non-museum goers to know the great work that we're trying to do here at the museums, and to bring them up to par, to make sure that we're celebrating and we're paying homage to where these acquisitions came from. So again, thank you so much, Amanda. I can't wait to have you on again. You were so amazing, and I hope to run into you at the museum.
Yes, yeah, and make sure you tag me in the Facebook post if you're able to, so that I can also respond to any of you that post comments.
Yes, thank you. And yes, RIP Chadwick Boseman. And again, thank you all for visiting and checking us out this evening. Again, you can find us on our social media platforms, Newark Museum of Art on IG, and you can also find us on the web at www.newarkmuseumart.org. And on your screen right now is a link if you are interested in continuing to support us, so we have more cool programming like this. The link is there for you to click, or not necessarily click, but to type into your web browser. So that is newarkmuseumart.org/annual fund. And it's your way to contribute to making sure that you support the Newark Museum of Art. And if you want to talk to our Director of Individual Giving, you can reach out to her directly. That is Michelle Saliola. Her email is also located at the bottom of the screen. So again, thank you. You all have a good night, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.